Good morning and welcome to this new lecture. Today we're going to talk about two very important verbs, the verb sum, to be, and the verb possum, to be able to. These two verbs are very important because of course they are very frequent in Latin and you will find them all the time. So let's start with the verb sum. So the verb sum means to be, and in general the verb to be is irregular in almost every language, and Latin is no exception. Fun fact, the verb to be is also the most used in every language, and this is why its forms are very irregular. In the case of Latin, irregular means that it does not belong to any conjugation, but it has its proper forms. This, of course, means that its forms must be memorized. So, simple question, is the verb to be irregular in English? Of course it is, as in any other language. So the verb to be, as you can see in English, is pretty irregular. It has multiple roots, as you can see from its principal part. So the infinitive is to be, the simple past is was, were, and the participle is been. So as you can see, it has two roots, the root starting with a B and the root starting with a W. So the forms beginning with a B come from an Old English verb, beon, which is to be or to become, which also has a Proto-Germanic root, which is beuna, which in turn comes from a Proto-European word. And the forms with W come from the past tense of the verb wesan, which is a form from the Proto-Germanic wesana, which also has a root in Indo-European. So how is it possible that there are different roots for the same verb? Well, the reason is simple, because originally it means that they were the roots of different verbs and then they were put together under the same verb because they had the same meaning. So originally the verb beon was different from the verb wesan, but since they both mean to become or to be or to remain, they were basically assimilated to the single meaning of the verb to be. So let us see the Latin roots of the verb sum. So the verb sum in Latin has three roots: s, which is generally found before I and U, s, which is found before a consonant, and r, which is found before a or e. Now, the stem R comes from the stem S due to a complex phenomenon called rotacism. So to put it simple, rotacism is this fact. At some point in the evolution of Latin, basically all the S between two vowels become R. So this happens because at some point in Latin there were great fluctuations for the pronunciations of the S. And at some point, Latin grammarians just said, okay, let's transform all the S between two vowels in R, so that we don't have any more uncertainty about the pronunciation of the S. Good news is that the personal endings of the verb sum are exactly the same of the regular verbs, so to speak. So M or O, ST, mus, tis, nt. Let's look at the simple tenses of sum. As you can see, I think that the best thing in this case is just to learn them by memorizing them. You don't have to reason too much about the stems because I fear that you would be confused. I think that you should memorize them as they are. So I will pronounce the present. Sum es est, sumus estis sunt. Of course, I am, you are, he is, etc. Imperfect. Eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratis, erant. I was, you were, he was, etc. Future. Ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritis, erunt. As you can see, the present has two stems, the stem S, which is found before U, and the stem S, which is found before consonants. The imperfect has the stem R, with the thin vowel A, so eram, eras, erat. And the future has the stem R with the thin vowel I. So ero, eris, erit, eritis, erimus, eritis. So the first person of the singular of the future tense is an exception because originally is erio and then it gets contracted in ero. As for the third person plural erunt, we said that the Latins don't like too much the ending in int. And so, as in the future of first and second conjugation, they just put an unt. So this is true for the future of the verb sum too. So let's switch to the second verb, the verb possum. So the verb possum, which means to be able, is a verb which is closely related to sum. It is formed by the adjective potis plus the verb sum. So it's a verb which is composed by a prefix and the verb sum. Originally, the adjective potis meant powerful. However, if I am powerful enough to do something, it means that I am capable of doing that thing. And this is how the verb possum acquired the meaning of to be able, so to be powerful, to be capable of doing something. Good news for the verb possum is that the endings of possum are exactly the same of the verb sum, since it's a verb that is composed by a prefix and all the forms of sum. So the logical consequence is that if you know well the verb sum, it is impossible for you to make mistakes with the forms of possum, because the endings are exactly the same. Let us see the conjugation for the simple tenses. I will read all of them. So let's start with the present. Possum, potes, potest. Possumus, potestis, possunt. Let's go with the imperfect. Poteram, poteras, poterat. Poteramus, poteratis, poterant. Future. Potero, poteris, poterit, poterimus, poteritis, poterunt. So, as you can see, the prefix in this case is always pot. But in the first person singular and in the first person plural of the present, we have a double S, because when the prefix pot meets the S and is followed by an S, the ending is going to be a double S. This is because, of course, the original form, let's take the first person singular as I do in the example, would be potsum, which is kind of difficult to pronounce, and basically the first T becomes an S because it's easier to pronounce it. This phenomenon is more complex than I explained it, and it's called assimilations, and one day we will talk about that. For now, you just have to know that since potsum was very difficult to pronounce, it just became possum. As you can see, the forms of possum are really easy to learn, because the prefix is almost always pot, and the endings, the forms, are exactly the same of the verb sum. So for the present, we're gonna have pot sumes est, sumus estis sunt. For the imperfect, pot eram eras erat eramus eratis erant. And for the future, pot ero eris erit erimus eritis erunt. Therefore, as you can see, if you know the forms of sum, it is impossible for you to go wrong with the forms of possum. These are two very important verbs, and you find them all the time in Latin, and so it is important for you to memorize all of these forms. Okay, this is all I had to say. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in class.